Hello, my dears. Thank you all so much for joining me today. So, before we begin our reading session for today, I shall light some incense to help set the mood to one of peace and calm. So today, we will continue on with our stories involving priests and saints. Our first story for today is called The Story of the Little Bird, attributed to T. Crofton Crocker. Many years ago, there was a very religious and holy man, one of the monks of a convent, and he was one day kneeling at his prayers in the garden of his monastery when he heard a little bird singing in one of the rose trees of the garden. And there never was anything that he had heard in the world so sweet as the song of that little bird. And the holy man rose up from his knees, where he was kneeling at his prayers, to listen to its song, for he thought he never in all of his life heard anything so heavenly. And the little bird, after singing for some time longer on the rose tree, flew away to a grove at some distance from the monastery, and the holy man followed it to listen to its singing, for he felt as if he would never be tired of listening to the sweet song it was singing out of its throat. And the little bird, after that way, went away to another distant tree and sung there for a while, and then to another tree, and so on in the same manner, but ever further and further away from the monastery, and the holy man still following it further and further and further, still listening delighted to its enchanted song. But at last he was obliged to give up, as it was growing late in the day, and he returned to the convent. And as he approached it in the evening, the sun was setting in the west, with all the most heavenly colors that were ever seen in all the world. And when he came into the convent, it was nightfall. And he was quite surprised at everything he saw, for they were all strange faces about him in the monastery that he had never seen before, and the very place itself, and everything about it, seemed to be strangely altered, and altogether it seemed entirely different from what it was when he had left in the morning. And the garden was not like the garden where he had been kneeling at his devotion when he first heard the singing of the little bird. And while he was wondering at all he saw, one of the monks of the convent came up to him, and the holy man questioned him. "Brother, What is the cause of all the strange changes that have taken place here since the morning? And the monk that he had spoke to seemed to wonder greatly at his question, and asked him what he meant by the change since morning. For sure, there was no change. That all was just as before. And then he said, "Brother, why do you ask these strange questions? And what is your name? For you wear the habit of our order, though we have never seen you before." So upon this, the holy man told his name, and said he had been at Mass in the chapel in the morning before he had wandered away from the garden, listening to the song of a little bird that was singing amongst the rose trees, near where he was kneeling at his prayers. And the brother, while he was speaking, gazed at him very earnestly, and then told him that there, in the Covenant, a tradition of a brother of his name who had left it 200 years before, but that what was become of him was never known. And while he was speaking, the holy man said, "My hour of death is come. Blessed be the name of the Lord for all of his mercies to me, through the merits of his only begotten Son." He kneeled down that very moment and said, "Brother, take my confession, for my soul is departing." And he made his confession and received his absolution, and was anointed, and before midnight he died. The little bird you see was an angel, one of the cherubs, one of the cherubims or seraphims, and that was the way the Almighty was pleased in his mercy to take himself the soul of that holy man. Our next story for today is called The Midnight Ride, attributed to Lady Wilde. One evening, a man called Sean Road was out looking for a red cow that had strayed away, when he heard voices round him, and one said, "Get me a horse," and another cried, "Get me a horse." "And get me a horse too," said Sean, "since they seem so plenty, for I'd like to ride along with you." And with that he found himself on the instant mounted on a fine gray horse beside another man who rode on a black horse. And they rode away and away till they came to a great city. "Now, do you know where you are?" said the black horseman. "You are in London, and whatever you want you can have." "Thank you kindly, my friend," said the other. "So with your leave, I'll just have a good suit of clothes, for I'm in want of the same. Can I have them?" "By all means," said the black horseman. "There, go into the merchant's shop and ask for what you would like. And if he refuses, just throw the stone I give you on the floor, and the whole place will seem on fire. But don't be frightened, only wait your good luck." So Sean went into the biggest shop there was, and he spoke to the merchant quite stiff and proud. "Show me your best suit of clothes you have," said he. "Never mind the price, that's of no consequence. Only be very particular as to the fits." But the shopman laughed aloud. "We don't make clothes for beggars like you," said he. "Be off out of this." Then Sean threw down the stone on the floor, and immediately the whole place seemed on fire. And the merchant ran out himself, and all the shopmen after him to get pails of water. And Sean laughed when he saw them all drenched. "Now, what will you give me," said he, "if I put out the fire for you?" "You shall have the price of the best suit of clothes in the shop," answered the merchant, "all paid down in gold. Only help me put out the fire." So Sean stooped down and picked up the stone and put it quietly into his pocket, and instantly all the flames disappeared. And the merchant was so grateful that he paid him down all of the gold for the clothes and more. And Sean bid him good night and mounted the gray steed again, quite happy in himself. "Now," said the black horseman, "is there anything else you desire? For it is near 10 o'clock, and we must be back by midnight, so just say what you would like to do." "Well," said Sean, "I would like of all the things to see the Pope of Rome, for 2 of our priests are disputing as to who is to get the parish, and I want Father McGrath to have it, for I have a great opinion of him. And if I ask His Holiness to settle it all in no time and forever." "Come then," said the black horseman. "It is a long way to Rome, certainly, but I think we'll manage it in the 2 hours and be back before 12 o'clock. So they rode away like the wind, and in no time Sean found himself before the great palace of the Pope, and all the grand servants with gold sticks in their hands stared at him and asked him what he wanted. "Just go in," said he, "and tell His Holiness that Sean rode all the way from Ireland, is here and wants to see him very particularly." But the servants laughed and struck him with their gold sticks and hunted him away from the gate. Now, the Pope, hearing the rout, looked out of the window, and seeing Sean rode, he came down and asked him what he wanted. "Just this, Your Holiness," answered Sean. "I want a letter on behalf of Father McGrath, bidding the bishop to give him the parish, and I'll wait till Your Holiness writes it, and meanwhile let me have a little supper, for it's hungry I am after my long ride." And the Pope laughed and told the servants to drive the fellow away, for he was evidently out of his wits. So Sean grew angry and flung down the stone on the floor, and instantly all the place seemed to be of fire, and the Pope ordered the grand servants to go for water. and they had to run like mad getting pails and jugs of water. Whatever they could lay their hands on, and all of their fine clothes were spoiled, and the beautiful goat sticks were flung away in their fright, while they took the jugs and splashed and dashed the water over each other. Now it was Sean's turn to laugh till his sides ached, but his holiness looked very grave. "Well," said Sean, "if I put out the fire, what will you do for me? Will you write that letter?" "Aye, I will," said the Pope, "and you shall have your supper also. Only help us put out the fire, my fine fellow." So Sean quietly put the stone back in his pocket, and instantly all of the flames disappeared. "Now," said the Pope, "you shall have supper of the best in the palace, and I'll write a letter to the bishop, ordering him to give Father McGrath the parish. And here, besides, is a purse of gold for you, and take it with my blessing." He then ordered all of the grand servants and to get supper for the excellent young man from Ireland, and to make him comfortable. So Sean was mighty pleased, and ate and drank like a prince. He then mounted the grey steed again. Just as midnight struck, he found himself at his own door, but all alone, for the grey steed and the black horseman had both vanished. But there stood his wife, crying her eyes out, and in great trouble. "Oh, Sean Agra, I thought you were dead, or that evil had fallen on you." "Not a bit of it," said Sean. "I've been supping with the Pope of Rome, and look here at all the gold I have brought home for you, my darlings." And he put his hand in his pocket to get the purse, but lo, there was nothing except a rough grey stone. And from that hour to this, his wife believes that he dreamed of the whole story as he lay under the hayrick, on his way home from a carouse with the boys. However, Father McGrath got the parish, and Sean took great care to tell him how he had spoken up boldly for him to the Pope of Rome, and made his holiness write a letter to the bishop about him. And Father McGrath was a nice gentleman, and he smiled and told Sean he thanked him kindly for his good word. Our next story for today is called King O'Toole and His Goose, attributed to S. Lover. By Gore, I thought all the world far and near heard of King O'Toole. Well, well, but the darkness of mankind is intelligible. Well, sir, you must know, as you didn't hear it before, that there was a king called King O'Toole, that was a fine old king in the old ancient times, long ago, and it was him that owned the churches in the early days. The king, you see, was the right sort. He was the real boy, and loved sport as he loved his life, and hunting in particular. And from rising on the sun, up he got, and away he went over the mountains, um, he going after the deer, and the fine times they were. Well, it was all mighty good, as long as the king had his health. But, you see, in course of time the king grew old. By reason he was stiff in his limbs, and when he got stricken in years, his heart failed him, and he was lost entirely for want of diversion, because he couldn't go hunting any longer. And, by gosh, the poor king was obliged to last for them to get a goose to divert him. Oh, you may laugh if you like, but it's truth I'm telling you. And the way the goose diverted him was this way. You see, the goose was used to swim across the lake and go diving for trout and catch fish on a Friday for the king, and flew every other day round about the lake, diverting the poor king. All went on mighty well until, by God, the goose got stricken in years like her master, and couldn't divert him any longer. And then it was that the poor king was lost completely. The king was walking one morning by the edge of the lake, lamenting his cruel fate, and thinking of drowning himself, that could get no diversion from life, when all of a sudden, turning round the corner beyond, who should he meet but a mighty decent young man coming up to him. "God save you," says the king to the young man. "God saves you kindly, King O'Toole," said the young man. "True for you," says the king. "I am King O'Toole," says he, "prince and plenipotentiary of these parts," said he. "And how come you seem to know that?" says he. "Oh, never mind," says Saint Kavin. You see, it was Saint Kavin, sure enough. The saint himself in disguise, and nobody else. "Oh, never you mind," said he. "I know more than that. May I make bold to ask you, how is your goose, King O'Toole?" said he. "Lord and agers, how come you know about my goose?" said the king. "Ah, no matter. I was given to understand it," said Saint Kevin. And after some more talking, the king says, "What are you?" "I'm an honest man," says Saint Kevin. "Well, honest man," says the king, "and how is it you make your money so easily?" "By making old things as good as new," said Saint Kevin. "Is it a tinkerer you are?" said the king. "No," said the saint, "I am no tinkerer by trade, King O'Toole. I've a better trade than a tinkerer," said he. "What would you say," said he, "if I make your old goose as good as new?" My dear, at the word of making his goose as good as new, you'd think the poor old king's eyes was ready to jump out of his head. With that, the king whistled, and down came the poor goose, all as one a hound would. waddling up to the poor cripple, her master, and as like him as two pays. The minute the saint clapped his eyes on the goose, "I'll do the job for you," says he, King O'Toole. "By Jamin," said King O'Toole, "if you do, but I'll say you're the cleverest fellow in the 7 parishes." "Oh, by dad," said Saint Kavin, "you must say more nor that. My horn's not so soft all out," said he, "as to repair your old goose for nothing. What'll you give me if I do the job for you?" "That's the chat," said Saint Kavin. "I'll give you whatever you ask," says the king. "Isn't that fair?" "Devil's a fairer," said the saint. "That's the way to do business. Now," said he, "this is the bargain I'll make with you, King O'Toole. Will you give me all the ground the goose flies over, the first offer, after I make her as good as new?" "I will," said the king. "You won't go back on your word?" said Saint Kavin. "Honor bright," said King O'Toole, holding out his fist. "Honor bright," said Saint Kavin. Back again. "It's a bargain. Come here," he says to the poor old goose. "Come here, you unfortunate old cripple. And it's I that'll make you a sporting bird." With that, my dear, he took up the goose by the 2 wings. "Christ, oh my Christ on you," said he, marking her to grace with this blessed sign at the same minute, and throwing her up in the air. "Phew," said he, just giving her a blast to help her. And with that, my jewel, she took to her heels, flying like one of the angels themselves, and cutting as many capers as a swallow before the shower of rain. Well, my dear, it was a beautiful sight to see the king standing with his mouth open, looking at his poor old goose flying as light as a lark. And better nor ever she was, for when she looked at his foot, patted her on the head, and "Ma Bourine," said he, "but you are the darlings of the world." "And what do you say to me," said Saint Kavin, "for making her like?" "By God," said the king, "I'll say nothing but the art of man, barring the bees." "And you say no more that," said Saint Kavin. "And that I'm beholden to you," said the saint. "But will you give me all the ground the goose flew over?" said Saint Kavin. "I will," said King O'Toole. "And you're welcome to it," said he, "though it's the last acre I have to give." "But you'll keep your word true?" said the saint. "As true as the sun," said the king. "It's well for you, King O'Toole, that you'd said that word," says he, "for if you didn't say that word, the devil received the bit of your goose I'd ever fly again." With the king was as good as his word, Saint Kavin was pleased with him, and then it was that he made himself known to the king. "And," said he, King Utul, you're a decent man, for I only come here to try you. You don't know me, said he, because I'm disguised. Musha, then, said the king, who are you? I'm Saint Kevin, said the saint, blessing himself. Oh, Queen of Heaven, said the king, making the sign of the cross between his eyes, and falling down on his knees before the saint. It is the great Saint Kevin, said he, that I've been discoursing all this time without knowing it, said he, all as one as if he was a lump ivacasum. And you're a saint, said the king. I am, said Saint Kevin. By God, I thought I was only talking to a decent boy, said the king. Well, you know the differ now, said the saint. I'm Saint Kevin, said he, the greatest of all the saints. And so the king and his goose had his goose as good as noon, to divert him as long as he lived. And the saint supported him after he came onto his property, as I told you, until the day of his death. And that was soon after, for the poor goose thought he was catching a trout one Friday. But, my jewel, it was a mistake he made. Instead of a trout, it was a thieving horse eel. And by gore, instead of the goose killing the trout for the king's supper, my dad, the eel killed the king's goose. The small blame to him, but he didn't eat her, because he wouldn't dare eat what the Saint Kevin laid his blessed hands on. Our next story for today is how St. Patrick received the staff of Jesus, attributed to Patrick Kennedy. Patrick was born, according to the best authorities, in the Roman colony of Tabernia, afterwards named Bononia, now Boulogne-sur-Mer. His father, the Roman Calphurnius, his mother, first a beautiful Gaulish captive, then wife to the Roman officer. And a descent on the coast by Niall of the 9 hostages he was captured. And the next 7 years of his life was spent in herding swine in the north of Ireland. Making his escape, he regained France, and finding within himself a strong vocation for the preaching of Christ to the pagan Irish, he entered on the course of theological studies, and being in time ordained and appointed to the mission, he returned to Ireland. After some conversions in the north, and using a barn as his first cathedral, he preached before King Leocaire and his court, and received the royal permission to teach the new faith through the island, provided he caused no social disturbance. From this period, AD 432, till his death, placed by some in 460, by others in 492. His missionary and episcopal labors never ceased, And before his departure in the greater part of the island, dwellers were Christian. When our saint was returning to Rome, from Rome to France, in his way to Ireland, he stopped at a religious house in an isle in the Gulf of Gionia, and was entertained for a night by the inmates, whose self-imposed duty was the care of wrecked sailors. He revealed his name and mission, and observed that about half the community were young and fresh-looking, and the rest very aged and infirm. One of the younger brothers surprised him not a little by mentioning that the very old members were their children. "It is," said he, "about a century since I and my companions agreed to live here in community, labor with our hands, and spend a certain time of the day in reciting holy offices. We were all widowers, and children remained to some of us. These are they," pointing to the aged men. "One night it was our good fortune to entertain a stranger pilgrim of a sweet and majestic countenance, and when he was about to quit us in the morning, he spoke these words, handing to our superior the staff which he had in his hands. 'In requital for your loving hospitality, I leave you this staff. During its stay with you, years shall have no effect on your strength nor appearance. Retain it till my servant Patrick rests here on his way to Ireland for the conversion of its people, and give it into his hands when he quits you.' We all listened with awe, and when the last word was spoken, the majestic form was no longer there. Our children entered the community as they grew up, but the blessing not having been addressed to them. Years have made their natural effect. When you depart, bearing this sacred staff with you, we expect our release from fleshly bonds. This or some other staff attended the saint in his many weary journeys throughout the length and breadth of Erin, and when he died it was preserved at his cathedral in Armagh. At a later date it was transferred to Christ Church Cathedral in Dublin. Our next story for today is called St. Patrick's Contest with the Druids, attributed to Patrick Kennedy. At the moment when the high pile of brushwood, crowned with flowers, was about to be lighted up by the hands of the chief druid, the king's eyes sparkled with rage. For eastward a weak but steadily light was beheld glimmering. "Who," said he, "has dared to commit this sacrilege?" "We know not," was the answer from many voices in the assembly. "O king," said the chief druid, "if this fire be not extinguished at once, it will never be quenched. It will put out our sacred fires, and the man who was enkindled it will overcome thee, and he and his successors will rule Erin till the end of time. Go then, said Leocaire, quench his light, and bring him hither. We go, was the answer, but let all in the assembly turn their backs towards the magic blaze. Meanwhile, let our own sacred fires be kindled, and all the dwellers in Erin rejoice in its light. When we have brought this stranger into its presence, let no one rise to do him homage. So saying, the chief druid set fire to the pile, and, accompanied by 2 other druids and some guards, proceeded till he came to where the saint and his assistants, in their white robes, were chanting their songs. What mean these incantations? Cried the druid, curiously glancing at the books, so unlike their own wooden staves and tablets. Or why this flame on the eve of Beltane, held on May 1st, although it can be celebrated in the according seasonal time, contrary to the orders of Arbi and the Arch-Druid. Accompany us to the assembly at Tara, and account for your disobedience, but first extinguish that ill-boding light. Of all that sat or stood in the presence of the king, no one arose to show respect to the newly arrived but double-hatched and aged druid, and the young poet Faich, who thus braved the king's displeasure. He, fixing his eyes sternly on the saint and his followers, sharply addressed them. Know ye not the law of the land, that whoever on the eve of Beltane kindles a fire before the blaze is seen in Tara is devoted to death? Patrick then commenced by declaring that the unity of the Godhead and the Trinity of persons, the creation and fall of man, the necessity of a mediator, the incarnation of the Son of God, and our redemption thereby, the necessity of true Christian belief, and the rejection of all creature worship, not excepting that of genial life-cherishing Beal. He then alluded to his former captivity and the object of his present mission, and he besought the king and people to not resist the good impulses which would be vouchsafed by God's goodness to everyone who did not willfully offer opposition to them. The hearts of the king and the greater part of the druids remained obdurate, but such persuasive strength was vouchsafed to the words of the saint, that very many hung on his lips with veneration and enthusiasm. The Ard-Right observed this with regret, but his power was much restricted, and he did not venture to express open dissatisfaction. He ordered apartments to be assigned to Patrick and his companions, and appointed him to argue with his druids in the morrow. Thousands were assembled next day on the wide plain, and the stern-looking druids filled the greater part of the space, enclosed for all disputants. After some explanations and arguments were abduced by the missionary, which told heavily on the priests, the chief cried out in an arrogant tone, "If the Son of God has redeemed the human race, and if you are sent by him, work a miracle to prove your mission. I will not seek to disturb the order of providence, to gratify mere curiosity," modestly answered the saint. "Then I will approve the truth of Druidic worship by effecting what you fear to attempt," cried the infuriated pagan, and beginning to describe lines in the air with his wand, and to chant spells, a thick veil of snow shut out the light and heat of the sun, and covering the ground several feet, an intense cold was felt, and the teeth of everyone in the assembly chattered. Cries of discontent arose, and the saint addressed the druid. "See how the assembly suffer. Banish this cold and snow, and admit the warm sunshine. I cannot do so till this hour on tomorrow. Ah, you are powerful for evil, not for good. Very different is the gift bestowed on the messenger of the giver of all good." He made the sign of the cross, invoked the aid of the Holy Trinity, and the snow sunk into the soil. The grass again emerged green and dry, and the blue air appeared again, warmed by the bright and comforting sunbeams. All the people invoked blessings on the head of the beneficent apostle. "To convince you all," cried the druid, "for our power and that of our gods, behold what I am empowered to do." In a few seconds, darkness, such as seldom shrouds the earth, fell on the assembly, and they groped about and murmured. Again was the thick black cloud dispersed by the prayer of the apostle, and thousands of tongues blessed him. The king, wishing other proofs, cried, "Each throw his book into the water, and let him in whose book the letters remain uninjured be declared the minister of truth." "I will not consent," said the druid. "He has a magic power over water, of which I know not the extent." "Well then," said the king, "let the ordeal be by fire." "Nay, his magic also embraces the fire." "Well," cried the king, "we are tired. Let this last trial be made. Each priest enter a tent filled with dry boughs, which shall then be set on fire." "Nay," said the saint, "let one be filled with the branches still green, and this I resign to the opponent of my sacred mission." Young Saint Benin, who attended night and day to St. Patrick, besought his leave to enter the hut of dry boughs, and his request was granted, he bearing the druid's mantle, and the druid bearing his. Both huts were fired at the same moment, and in the twinkling of an eye, the druid and the green twigs full of sap were reduced to ashes by the devouring flames, nothing being spared but the cloak of the saint, and whose hut naught had consumed but the druid's garment. This was the last trial which the assembly would suffer. Thousands, including the queen and her daughters, openly professing in their belief in the God of Patrick. Our next story for today is called St. Patrick and the Hero Cowdy, attributed to William Carleton. St. Patrick, it seems, was one Sunday morning crossing a mountain on his way to chapel to say masses, and as he was a humble man, coaches weren't then invented at any rate, and a great pedestrian, he took the shortest cut across the mountains. In one of his lonely glens, he met a herd cowdy. Oh, the title is The Herd Cowdy. The font made it look like hero. He met a herd cowdy who spent his time in eulogizing his master's castle, according to the precepts of those times, which was not by any means so learned and primogenitive as now. The countenance of the day was clear and extremely sabbatical. Everything was at rest, barring the little river in front of him, and indeed one would think it flowed with more decency and better behavior than upon other sympathizing occasions. The birds, to be sure, were singing, but it was easy to see that they chirped out their best notes in honor of the day. "Good morrow on you," said St. Patrick. "What's the reason you're not going to prayers, my fine little fellow?" "What prayers?" asked the boy. St. Patrick looked at him with a very pitiful and calamitous expression on his face. "Can you bless yourself?" said he. "No," said the boy. "I don't know what that means." Worse and worse, thought St. Patrick. "Poor Buchal, it isn't your fault. And how do you pass your time here?" "Why, my mate's food's brought to me, and I do be making king's crowns out of my rushes, when I'm not watching the cows and the sheep." St. Patrick slicked down his head with great dereliction and said, "Well, actually, you do be operating king's crowns, but I tell you you're born to wear a greater one than a king's, and that is crown of glory. Come along with me." "I can't leave my cattle," said the other, afraid that they might go astray. "Right enough," said St. Patrick, "but I'll let you see that they won't." Now and anyhow, St. Patrick understood cattle irresistible himself, having been a herd cowdy in his youth. So he clapped his thumb to his thrapple and gave a loy to the sheep, and behold you, they came about him with great relaxation and respect. Keep yourselves sober and fictitious, said he, addressing them, till this boy comes back. And don't be going beyond your owner's property, or if you do, it'll be worse for you. If you regard your health during the approximating season, mind and attend to my words. The rot this year is likely to be rife with you, I can tell. Now you see, every sheep, while he was speaking, lifted the right foreleg and raised the head a little, and behold, when he finished, they kissed their foot and made him a low bow as the mark of their estimation and superfluity. He then clapped his finger and thumb in his mouth, gave a loud whistle, and in a periodical time he had all the other cattle on the hill about him, to which he addressed in the same undeniable oration, and they bowed to him with the same polite geniality. He then brought the lad along with him, and as they made progress in the journey, the little fellow says, "You seem frustrated by the walk, and if you let me carry your bundle, I'll feel obliged to you." "Do so," said the saint, "and as it's rather long, throw the bag that the things are in over your shoulder. You'll find that's the easiest way to carry it." Well, the boy adopted this invitation, and they went ambiguously along till they reached the chapel. "Do you see that house?" said St. Patrick. "I do," said the other. "It has no chimney on it." "No," said the saint, "it has not, but in that house Christ, he that saved you, will be present today." And the boy then shed tears when he thought of the goodness of Christ in saving one that was a stranger to him. So they entered the chapel, and the first thing the lad was struck with was with the beams of the sun that came through the window, shining beside the altar. Now he had never seen the like of it in a house before, and thinking it was put there for some use or other in interior, he threw the wallet, which was like a saddle-bag, across the sunbeams, and lo and behold you, the sunbeams supported it, and at the same time a loud, sweet voice was heard saying, "This is my servant Saint Kieran, and he's welcome to the house of God." St. Patrick then took him and instructed him in the various edifications of the learned languages, until he became one of the greatest saints that ever Ireland saw, with the exception and liquidation of St. Patrick himself. Our next story is just a small little one, and this next story will end off our reading hour. It is called The Conversion of King Lochair's Daughters. Once, when Patrick and his clerics were sitting beside a well in a rath of Croghan, with books open on their knees, they saw coming towards them the two young daughters of the king of Connacht. 'Twas early morning, and they were going to the well to bathe. The young girls said to Patrick, "Whence are ye, and whence come ye?" And Patrick answered, "It were better for you to confess to the true God than to inquire concerning our race." "Who is God?" said the young girls. "And where is God? And of what nature is God? And where is his dwelling place? Has your God sons and daughters, gold and silver? Is he everlasting? Is he beautiful? Did Mary foster her son? Are his daughters dear and beauteous to men of the world? Is he in heaven or on earth, in the sea, in the rivers, in mountain places and valleys?" Patrick answered them and made known who God was, and they believed and were baptized, and a white garment put on their heads. And Patrick asked them, would they live on, or would they die and behold the face of Christ? They chose death and died immediately, and were buried near the well, so black. I knew this section would be strenuous for me to read, considering the heavy Catholicism. But my goodness, I found myself getting quite frustrated with the behaviors of St. Patrick in the stories. So I do apologize if you could hear some of my annoyances within the stories. Though I may appear a creature of Christ, and they may have adopted me as one, I am a creature of folklore in the end. Something that is to be ignored and denied by them, though I do not submit to that. But I do hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day today. And I do thank you all so much for joining me. But until next time we meet, my dears, ta-ta, and fare thee well. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you like what you saw here, I ask that you leave a like, comment, subscribe, and until we next meet, my dears, I do hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And until then, ta-ta, and farewell.